Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us from all around the world, Devon, Canberra, Tilburg. It's great to have you joining us. I'm Amy Baker, and this is another of our PI webinars. Delighted to be joined by a big panel today, as you can see, where we're going to be talking about the evolution of student recruitment in India, one of those all-important markets that you cannot ignore. So we have polls at the bottom. We'd love to hear from you. Please ask a question. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We're going to hear from all of them. We're going to have a few results from a remote readiness survey, so we can understand how universities have been accommodating and supporting their Indian students. And then we're going to talk about the future of the recruitment landscape in India. So welcome, everybody. First of all, let me introduce our panelists. We have Digvijay Gagneja, who's COO of Leverage Education. Digvijay, hi.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. Next, we have Lakshmi Iyer, who is Head of Education at Sanam S4, and she's been around forever, a veteran of the scene. Welcome, Lakshmi.
Hi. Oh, gosh.
We have Sandeep Sharma from the University of Essex, based in India, and an expert on working in market for a UK university. Hi, Sandeep.
Hello, Amy. Hi.
We have Katya Jain, who works with Leverage Edu, and she's their head coach. And finally, Karen Kemker, another well-known name for many, who is a serial board advisor and global education investor. He works with multiple education companies across the sector globally, and we'll hear from him on his horizon scanning. Hopefully he'll have lots of thoughts on the whole education landscape and how India fits into that in terms of student recruitment. Karen, thanks for joining us from Bali.
Thank you.
So first of all, to sort of prepare us for the remote readiness survey and the findings that you found, Kathy, I thought we'd go to Lakshmi and Sandeep and ask you how you have found the last 6 months have been. So Sandeep, I'd like to come to you first. Working for the University of Essex, you've obviously had a significant international cohort, some of whom are stuck in the UK, I presume, and some of whom returned to their home countries. So do you want to sort of paint a picture for us of how you've managed to support your students and how you've managed to deliver online learning and how you think University of Essex has done?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I think, well, the last 6 months have been really interesting. Of course, I mean, March, when India went into lockdown, March before that, I think UK infections were rising. So the problem was sort of twofold. First, from the UK perspective, where things were looking quite scary. We'd sort of closed our uni, we closed the offices, and there were still about 1,200 students who were living on campus. So the first sort of challenge we had to deal with was to open up again and offer them, a safe place to quarantine, isolate, get access to food, and start their sort of online blended education. So that was the first challenge, and I think we very successfully overcame that. And things are now good. I mean, things have improved incredibly. Of course, because infections in the UK have decreased significantly. We've opened up parts of campuses. We are now opening up on the 5th of October, so we've got a start date, which is a face-to-face. But things on the other end in India have declined. So we are waiting for India to improve and flights to start so that we can sort of finally invite students to come in. But generally, we see a lot of pent-up demand coming back in the last month or so, especially since VFS centers have opened up.
Okay, and for the students who were studying online from India, how do you think they found the experience of being an Essex student?
I think if I were a student myself, it would be very scary first, and then you sort of adapt to it and you realize this is the only other option. Also, Amy, the other thing which is really important for my sort of panelists and other people who are joining in to realize that India has to basically take a gap year or to basically drop out of your education has a big stigma attached to it in India. So a lot of students would try their best to be online, and even if it is, and I understand, sort of timings of classes, they would be in the second half, of course, since UK opens up late. But still, we had a pretty good turn-up ratio, and students attended, even if they were in India or if they were on campus.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the issues we're hearing, certainly with Canada right now, is there's a sort of time zone issue. I guess it's not quite so many time zones away in the UK. That's one advantage. Lakshmi, over to you. I mean, you work with a lot of universities, helping them in India. How did you find, from your client's perspective, that students coped with studying remotely if they were having to do that?
Thanks, Amy, for that question. So I find that institutions initially went into a shock mode, saying, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" And then they moved mountains to adapt to the situation, and they're still adapting to it because this is there is no playbook for dealing with this, right? No institution, or for that matter, any kind of organization could have prepared for a pandemic of this nature. So I think the initial resistance has kind of given way to acceptance on both sides, on the student side and on the institution side. And like Sandeep mentioned, in India, we go through a very linear way of kind of approaching our studies. So we finish one, we move into the next, and then go into a job. This is how it is. And this pandemic has really made both students and parents pause and probably kind of be more accepting of a gap year. And from an institution perspective, we have had many of our partner institutions looking at putting out modules that would train students to study online. Some of them have even kind of looked at offering financially disadvantaged students laptops. Many of them, used to use the university facilities to kind of cope with their studying. And many have also had prep courses prepared, try before you buy, for those who are still considering whether to attend the university or not. And the general feedback that we have had is that undergrad students are more open to starting online because they have in front of them at least 3 or 4 years. So even if they were to kind of study, say, 1 full year in India, they still think that okay, the next 2 years or 3 years I can go overseas, and that then gives sufficient time for the pandemic to play out and the whole world to get used to a new way of operating. So many institutions have kind of now realized that they have to offer strong academic support, probably asynchronous and synchronous learning, because going back to the point that you made about students who are studying in Canadian institutions and have come back home, have to sit up all night to attend classes. It's not feasible, it's not sustainable, right? And some have kind of looked at relaxed refund policies, because in India there is, and I'm sure Digvijay can kind of second this opinion, that most students and parents would think 100 times before paying the same fee for an online delivery vis-a-vis a face-to-face instruction program. So then in that context, how are you going to sort of get students to accept that, okay, this is the same course being delivered in a remote fashion? Because students do look at the ROI from that perspective, and they would expect a cheaper fees. So these are all new problems for institutions to handle, but I think we are all learning as we go along, and solutions are emerging.
Thanks, Lakshmi. Okay, I'm going to come to Digvijay next, because I think it would be great to hear from you about Leverage Edu. I just had a look at our polls. Please vote on the polls and submit some questions as we go. But one of our questions is, are you working with digital recruitment platforms such as Leverage Edu in India? We've only had 9 votes so far, but six of those, so 66% say no. So let's hear from you first about what Leverage Edu does, how you differentiate yourself in the market, and then we can come over to Cassie for your survey results.
Absolutely. So Leverage Edu essentially is a platform for students to vice versa, for universities to find the right fit students as well. So we are an AI-enabled platform. Using AI, we are essentially able to help students identify what is that right in the university, what students like these have, which universities have students like these gone to historically and done well at, which data points such as an academic profile or the professional profile, or their overall interests come into play to really define which universities should a particular student target. Similarly, we have a mentor marketplace at the back end, wherein every student gets assigned a mentor. And this mentor is, again, someone who is like a student historically and helps the student essentially in the entire admissions journey. So effectively, yeah, we help students find their dream university, and we use a lot of AI and technology to do it. Happy to talk a lot more about it throughout the webinar. Yeah, but I hope that answers
that's a little picture. And how long have you been operating?
So we started somewhere in 2017, Amy. It was started by Akshay Chaturvedi. He's a Forbes 30 under 30 alum now. It was started with a vision of helping students in their university admissions journey, because personally, even Akshay and I went to the same P school together, and we realized that students do not really have a real right support system in the existing agency system to be able to give them dispassionate advice, to be able to give them really transparent advice that is in their best interest, right? We found that a lot of the current brick and mortar players or the micro agents that exist in the market could be a lot more driven by commissions, driven by non-transparent advice, right? Which is where Akshay, when he started, Akshay comes from a very humble background, same as me, right? So that's why we really believed in the importance of getting great quality education, which is where we spent the first 2 years building this company out, really helping only students get to the tier 1 top Ivy League or equivalent institutions, right? And if we had not done that, we'd gone the direct recruitment agency route in the first 2 years, we would have been any other brick and mortar player. But really building that DNA out to make sure that we are student first and we make sure the student wins is what we had in mind. And for the first 2 years, we did that. We got about 2,000 students to get to all the top Ivy League or equivalent institutions. And which is where then we realized was a time while we had built the brand, while students recognized us as a student-first company, we started another brand called UniValley by Leverage Edu, which was more from a student recruitment perspective, but at the same time, sticking to our values, our DNA of being student-first and making sure the student wins in the entire process. So at UniValley, essentially, we work with a lot of universities. We have about 100 plus partners all across the globe. And we help students and universities find each other with the right fit match using AI and help universities recruit through our platform.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, that's a great introduction to the survey. So I'm actually, don't be offended, guys, but I'm going to get rid of some of you and I'll bring you back so that Kathy can show us her results. Kathy, would you like to screen share?
Amy, I'm just going to screen share and you can let me know if it's showing.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, all right. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We at Leverage realized that the higher education sector was so deeply impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. And in light of these trying times, we did a study called the Index of Remote Readiness to assess the rapid transition to online learning during this time. And secondly, we wanted to come up with a framework, right? Like Lakshmi ma'am rightfully said, there is no framework, there is no playbook. So this was essentially our starting point to give universities and students around the world a way to see what emergency response could look like in the future and should look like in the future, right? And we had 3 objectives for this survey. The first one was that we wanted this tool or this study to be a diagnostic tool where universities can see, okay, this is the response that I've had, this is where I was lacking, and this is my way forward. Secondly, we wanted it to be a benchmarking tool. So we surveyed over 200 universities and 500 students from around the world, came up with a global average. And now we're going to start telling universities, hey, this is where you are. This is what your students said. This is where you are globally in terms of how well you did during this crisis, right? And lastly, keeping with our decision, our student-first DNA, we wanted this to be a decision-making tool for students as well, right? And there's so much anxiety with students going to the US, to the UK, to Canada as well, Australia, New Zealand. They don't know what's going to happen in the next academic cycle. So we wanted students to see, okay, these are the universities that are doing really well. This is where you should place your trust. This is where you need to go, right? And just kind of ease that anxiety. So we wanted to help both students and universities with the survey, right? And then with this in mind, we came up with a model which talked about different drivers of readiness, right? The top 3, the top main drivers of readiness were governance, people, and processes. And we realized that these work in tandem with each other to prepare a university for remote readiness or for online delivery of classes or programs. And these were further broken down into 6 pillars, which in our opinion are very, very important to any program to any university delivering online education. This was teaching and learning, your pedagogy, continuity planning, which is improvement of systems and processes, contingency plans, and communication of this as well. Your experience and support, basically how we helping professors and students with back-end support during these online classes or during these trying times, and then your processes itself, right? How am I conducting my assessments? How is technology, and tech obviously is an enabler here. And I just want to point out that it is a very, very important pillar. We'll get to some of the findings and you'll see how these three pillars or these 6 pillars kind of work together in order to give us what would be a top performing university during this pandemic, or where universities can improve. Right, so the key findings that we found was that in the top quartile of our results, most of the universities were public universities from North America with a global rank between 1 and 400 on the QS ranking, right? This wasn't necessarily a very big surprise for us. We kind of expected this. But what came next is what was very interesting. And I think the other panelists have talked about this too. Continuity planning, or the admin, kind of took a backseat during this point, where universities were really scrambling to say, okay, how do I deliver my classes? How do I make sure my assessments are okay? How do I make sure all students are learning? And communication, contingency planning, or the way forward kind of didn't happen till much later. Right? And that caused a lot of anxiety with the students, especially in North America, given the immigration climate right now. We expected this to be a focus area for universities, but it really didn't come out that way. Third, technology alone, I think, is not an important indicator of remote readiness, right? We have so many, and we spoke to so many universities and so many students, and they said that, okay, you know what, if the tech piece is figured out, then online learning will go on. No, that's not the case. Right? Online learning, technology is an enabler for online learning. And then everything else, you have your support systems, you have your privacy, you have your assessments, you have your pedagogy, all of that kind of feeds into it. So we realized that technology alone, a high score for technology alone on the survey or on the index will not guarantee success. And we saw this predominantly with public and private universities. There was a lot of disparity where private universities did particularly well with the technology piece, right? But their overall score was a lot lower than public universities, and that's because public universities scored so well, did so well with all the other drivers, right? So I think for all universities, for all students out there, make sure that you're looking at all of this holistically and not just the tech piece. Lastly, smaller universities, contrary to popular belief, found the transition to online learning a lot more harder than mid-sized and large universities. Now, smaller universities are universities that have less than 5,000 students. Mid-sized would be around 15,000 students, and large universities would be 20,000 students plus. Given the volume of students that mid and large-sized universities deal with, we expected smaller universities to make that transition a lot more smoother, to be able to cope with this change a lot better, but that wasn't the case. So these were, 4 of our key findings from the survey, and we hope to keep building on this and then eventually give universities and students this tool to make informed decisions about what they're going to do during this pandemic and whatever the world throws at us next, right? And before I end, I just wanted to mention a few universities that have done particularly well on the survey. It was really heartwarming to see. So I think when we did the university survey, we realized that the University of Portsmouth, the University of Essex, and the University of Exeter really came out on top. And their response to this crisis was commendable. So kudos to you guys. And on the student side of it, when we looked at student satisfaction, we saw what students were thinking and feeling during the pandemic. We realized that the University of Otago in New Zealand and the University and RMIT in Australia had phenomenal student feedback. So congratulations, you guys. Keep doing what you're doing. And thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So I think I know we have somebody from Will from New Zealand. I don't know if he's at Otago. I don't think he is anymore, but that's really good to hear. Right, thanks, Cathy. I'm just going to bring in some more people back. Sorry, before you go, it was Essex, Portsmouth. Which was the other university? Which?
Exeter.
Exeter. Wow. Well, if you guys are watching, do tell us in the chat. What were your reactions to the survey today? Were you surprised or not?
I think the big piece was the technology one. That was something that we realized early on. We felt, okay, the university that's doing really well on getting the right online program manager on board and being able to distribute the courses well to the students is going to be leading the pack in terms of being ready for remote instruction. But it was something that was very surprising for us to really realize that at the end of it, it really boiled down to whether you can offer classes in the same time zone as a student, whether you have support in terms of faculty being available for one-to-one student interaction, let's say within an hour, which is where we realized and also partnered and are launching a program called UniSmarter by the Navitas group now in India, which does exactly this, right? It offers students all this flexibility over a 7-week course or a 14-week course, allows students to be able to learn online and then transfer to a university abroad later. Right, but that was one bit of a surprise, and we acted really quickly on it and decided to go ahead with partnering with UniSmarter.
Great. Listen, we've got somebody from Exeter here, and they're in the chat saying we ran what we call a commitment campaign from the start and messaged across all our prospective and current students, plus Project Enhance to focus on student experience. And that's really great. Sandeep, from your point of view, you've obviously done well as well. What do you think Essex was doing well? And thanks, Kathy. I'm going to let you go now. Thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Well, thanks for asking that question. I think with all British universities, for us, it was really important to take care of the students first, have a student first centric approach. I think what really helped us was the fact that we had early on realized that the traction in India for us is going to be certain courses like artificial intelligence and data science and the education technology, tech-related sort of fintech courses. And a lot of the learning resources were already aligned to be either taught through Moodle and online. So for us, it was, like Lakshmi mentioned, we moved mountains, and so did, I think, a lot of other institutions. And basically, it was a point of sort of changing things which would have ideally taken about 11 months within 11 days. So that, and I think commitment from academics, people were working across the globe, and they were really sort of committed to enhance that online learning experience. Plus, I think things start right at the top. So our Vice Chancellor really early on had a very clear bounce back strategy, and he said he wants to start on the 5th of October, and and everything else followed. So I think we're one of the first institutions to actually have a face-to-face start sort of launch. And as one of the partners for Leverage, we got really excited because when I was, during that sort of April, May period, things were really tense in the recruitment sort of environment in India. And when I discussed that with Akshay and Leverage, and we were sort of really excited, and we got positive feedback from students. So that, I think, the kind of UK universities which actually announced early on that they would have a bounce back strategy and they would make sure that they would deliver were the ones who certainly have gained a lot of traction.
Great. So it's very strong student messaging and a sort of top-down approach. That's what two things that picking up here, and as long as sort of holistic support strategy. Karen, I'm going to come to you now. Thanks for being patient. I mean, what's your view? You work across multiple types of education provider. You consult with and advise lots of different profiles of companies. What do you think are the key challenges with sort of maintaining that student support, but also conviction that they want to continue to study with an education provider?
So I'm a cynic in general.
Okay.
And when it comes to the motivations for international students to study abroad, I mean, I was an international student from India myself. I left India in September 1990 to go to boarding school in the United States. I only left, by the way, because I was being thrown out of my school in India, but that's a whole different story. And
commitment to success there. It's a different webinar.
Yeah, that's a different webinar. But to me, it's all about outcomes. And when a student wakes up, when an 8th or 9th grade student wakes up in India, they don't dream of going to university of. They don't dream of going to University of Essex or Surrey or Sydney. They wake up and they go, well, I'll go to Harvard. If I don't go to Harvard, I'll go to Stanford. And if I don't go there, I'll go to Cambridge. They've never heard of the rest of this whole bunch. And that process of educating them on viable options is the job of a company like Leverage EDU. But fundamentally, they are aiming for certain life goals. And those life goals are, they typically are for Indians. So Indians and Chinese are different. Most Chinese students will return home after studying abroad because having studied abroad in English equips them for their job market at home with a huge advantage over local universities. So if you're Coca-Cola or if you're Tencent in China, having a B student who can speak English is better than having an A student who can only speak Mandarin. And so the Chinese mostly go home because going abroad creates a lot of value for them. With Indians, most Indians want to remain abroad. Whether or not they pull it off is a different matter. And I remember at Parthenon, we would do surveys over a decade that would prove this. And so for Indians, this is largely an immigration route. This is largely a way for students to justify the high fees of a foreign university. It's a good salary and a job on the other side. And so I think we can debate all day about how good the badminton courts are and how nice the dormitories are, and whether or not, the economics course at Wolverhampton is better than the one at Sheffield. I mean, who knows, right? You've got to be kidding me if you can prove that objectively. But I'll tell you what does work is my university has a track record of getting every international student a job in the UK. I'll tell you that'll work. Because that, especially for Indian students, is a massive driver. And so I think students, the universities that wake up to this and are more quickly able to show their industry linkages, or wake up and start forming those industry linkages, and then say, we're not training you to become a Nobel Prize winning economist, because you're probably never going to get there. What we're training you to do with the economics course or the business course is to become a trainee accountant with a Big Four, or we're training you to join the graduate management program at HSBC in London. And here's how we're doing it, because we have HSBC on campus 4 times a year, and they come and they teach the course, they give little competitions. In other words, the universities that are able to sort of understand what it is their customer wants, and even stomach the idea that the student is their customer. Let's put that as step number 1. Those universities are the ones that will succeed. The universities that go on and on about how their economics or their business course is better than someone else's, those are the ones I don't think are going to get anywhere. And, in the middle, you have this element of our dormitories are really nice and our badminton courts are great. But I'd put that's on the margins. What really is going to work is that pathway to the outcome the student wants. And most students are not aiming for a phenomenal academic career in their field. They want a great job.
Yeah, I mean, very good point. And I'm going to have to plug there the Pi Live, which is our event coming up in October, because one of the tracks we have is employability. I mean, we see that this is a mission critical for education going forward, and the way universities are involving that employability agenda is really important. I mean, it's a very good point, and it brings me on to a point I wanted to ask all of you, which is, I mean, we've talked about the last 6 months and support who's done well and the sort of upset of the coronavirus. But I'd like you all to talk a few words on what you think the next academic year will look like. And in terms of the Indian student market, we have the graduate route in the UK coming on stream. I mean, will that change flows? Obviously, Sandeep, you can really only speak to Essex, but Lakshmi, Digvijay and Karen, I mean, you work with universities all around the world. Do you anticipate there being a sort of flex in the way Indian students, where they choose to study or how they choose to study? Lakshmi, let's come to you first. Okay,
so I think the Indian market, or consisting of students wanting to study overseas, is quite resilient. We are all waiting very eagerly for news around the vaccine. And in 4 weeks' time, hopefully, we will see the first set of results of the large trials of the AstraZeneca vaccine coming out. And then, that is going to be the next kind of hop-off point for how this, the trajectory is going to look like for the next few months with respect to Indian students wanting to leave the country and study overseas. Having said that, GIR has been welcome news in India. UK started recovering once the announcement was made, not even before. It started recovering just on the basis of the announcement, with no kind of procedures or anything being kind of cemented behind that. So it has had a positive impact, and September 2020 would have been a bumper year for the UK, but sadly not so because of COVID-19. But I would say that there has been good coordinated response between the announcements coming out of UKVI and the UK government compared to some of the other countries. And the very fact that UK has said that you would be able to have your GIR status retained if you arrive before a particular date in April 2021, it has been welcomed in India. And I agree with what Karan said. India is a very return on investment focused market, and large majority of students are looking for a migration opportunity and an ability to stay back and recover the money that they perhaps in currencies that are at least 70 to 80 times stronger than the Indian rupee, and having taken an education loan for which they have to pay the interest rate at the rate of at least 10%. So there is a requirement for them to stay back and recover that money. But having said that, we have all watched as to how countries have fought the COVID-19 pandemic at a government level. So, going back to the point that Sandeep made about, the Vice Chancellor of University of Essex saying, bounce back and we have to start on October 5th. And, that sort of, helped put, get everyone in the university prepared for that. But there is only so much that you can do at an institutional level. And this is what we are seeing in places like the United States, where the administration wakes up in the morning and says something, and that has got a cascading effect on whatever the good work that at the institutional level has happened to look after onshore students and also the new students who are expecting to arrive. So I think a coordinated response is very important in how the national strategy plays out in the eyes of all of these countries from where traditionally students have chosen to come and study at various institutions. And from all the surveys that we are doing currently, the news is good for New Zealand. Obviously, Jacinda has done a fantastic job. And it was good till about 10 days ago for Australia also, but this Melbourne lockdown and curfew has really spooked parents and students, but hopefully they will be able to flatten the curve and emerge out of this. But then, Qantas has said that they are not going to fly till March 2021. So it's not even just about kind of, institutions doing everything right, but at a national level. And then between countries, borders have to open. So there are so many other factors to this.
And I mean, I'm just looking at our poll here. I mean, asking our audience what the expectations are for student numbers in the next academic year. I mean, nearly 50% think less than 40% of normal numbers traveling abroad. Would you agree with that, Lakshmi? And then I'll come to you, Digvijay.
Yeah, not? I think for face-to-face, we are going to see probably maybe a 50% crash in numbers for face-to-face instruction. And probably we will see the recovery for September 2021 in some shape, size, or form. I think the February, March intakes would be impacted. There are no two ways about it.
Digvijay, over to you. I mean, what are you seeing at FSM in terms of country demand and also how many people will possibly postpone or not?
Yeah. So for us, things are looking very, very up. They're looking very, very positive. So we have like hundreds of students paying their deposits all across UK. A big exodus happening right now with all the new announcements coming up. Borders also probably opening up. We're seeing a lot of students really interested in the UK. But having said that, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are not markets that are not working for us. there are students that love Canada, for instance. They just want to go to Canada, irrespective of what is the case, right? They're okay starting online for us if that is the case, but they really want to go there. So we have, even US, we're getting a bunch of sort of applications coming our way. And in fact, just about a couple of days ago, Akshay and I were just wondering, what do we do with these students just in case the flights don't start? How do we get them to the UK? And can we charter a flight? And it was actually a joke, but then we really thought about it and we said, yeah, it is possible. We are actually in conversations with folks to figure out how we can charter a flight if we gather hundreds of students who really want to go to the UK, and we can actually make it happen for them in the October intake. And what we're finding is universities that are actually getting a physical start, which is happening a lot in the UK predominantly compared to the other with the other countries. They have an edge, right? Students do want to go for a physical course much more than they want to go for an online course because of the things we discussed before. But so definitely those universities are at an advantage. The other things that have happened is sort of COVID coming as a blessing, and Lakshmi would know this. We launched UniConnect by Leverage Edu. It's a virtual fair platform, and we actually got about 40 odd CNMS for universities to come and participate in the first fair. So we ended up creating something in 14 days flat, a state-of-the-art platform, probably the industry best, where students could literally come and talk to universities in a virtual fair platform. It was like a virtual emulation of a physical fair. Students could come and shortlist universities based on their interests, based on their specializations. They could read more about the universities then and there, have a conversation, and actually initiate an application while having a conversation with the student or with the university representative, right? And that saw a lot of students coming in. And as the students kept coming in, we realized a lot of universities also getting interested. So we've had 100 plus universities that have joined us in the last couple of months itself as partners, right? And also coming on board to do a lot of marketing activities for us as we see a lot of student intake coming to us. So we've had, for instance, we're doing the Liverpool clearing, the University of Liverpool's clearing activity on our UniConnect platform the next week. We're doing something with the University of Queensland now. We're doing the G8 virtual tour. All across five cities, across 500 schools in India. So doing a lot of these activities and all coming through the momentum we're seeing on the student side as also sort of getting universities interested. So we're seeing things getting more and more on the upside now, and we feel that next 6 months definitely are going to look a lot better than what they've looked like in the last 5-6 months of the COVID era.
So Amy, if I could pitch in here on the question. So I'm on the board of 2 companies that function in the international student recruiting space, and I agree with the commentary from Digvijay that in fact the interest to go abroad will only go up. Now, whether the logistics pan out, I don't know. So the 2 companies I'm involved with, one does pathways into Australia, and one is sort of a digital marketplace for students. We're seeing far more interest from the demand side than before, and we're seeing much more interest from the supply side. Now, why? So on the demand side, students want to leave places that have screwed up the handling of COVID, right? In general, you don't want to be in a country that buffs it all up, where you can't have a career, and where you may die in the biggest public health crisis of the last century. And that, by the way, is more or less a description of India, right? So there you go. So on the supply side, a rational actor will want to leave more now than they did 6 months ago. On the supply side, again, universities have never loved the idea of having tons of Indians and Chinese students. I remember being at Georgetown in the late 1990s, and then at Cambridge in the early 2000s. I mean, international students were there for a little bit of spiciness, but having us in bulk was never the idea. British universities were for British people, American universities for Americans. They have us because they need us. They need us for revenue, and they need revenue now more than ever.
Absolutely.
So in other words, I think on the demand side, a rational actor will want to leave a country that has poorly handled COVID. And India has done it in a way that it has economically hobbled itself for the next 3 to 5 years, if not longer. So if I'm a young person, I'm thinking, I got to get out of here. And on the supply side, a rational actor would say, we need revenue, and the surest shot we've got are these full fee paying international students. They're smart, they're motivated, they'll pay, we'll deal with it. Now, all that's left is logistics, right? All we have left is logistics. But here's an interesting fact for you, which is international students have always had to do health checks. When I went to the US, I had to do a chest x-ray to check my tuberculosis exposure. I had to have an MMR shot, even though I'd had one as a kid. I had to do it again. When I went to the UK, when I showed up for Cambridge, I had to go to my nearest NHS clinic to have a health checkup. So international students have always been subject to a level of health screening that tourists, business visitors, and even economic migrants have not been subject to.
That's a really good point.
So we can create we can create protocols and pathways for international students that just build on precedents of the past. You want them to get their shots and scans before they get on the flight? No problem. You want them to get shots and scans once they land? No problem. You want them to isolate in a dorm with 200 other crazy kids? No problem. In other words, international students are one of the easiest cohorts to handle from a logistics perspective. All these things are solvable. So we will solve that logistical plug. Now, does it delay things by 3 months, 6 months for this year? Yes, but is it going to delay things for a year? The reason why I say no is because it will actually cause universities to collapse en masse if it's a year. So we will find protocols through it before then, and the rational actors on all sides will act to make it happen.
Thank you. Very good point. And by the way, Georgetown and Cambridge, nice name drops there. I'm impressed. Okay, thanks. I'm going to turn to some questions because I've just seen the time and we have quite a few questions coming in and I want to raise your questions and I have a couple more of my own, but let's go to your questions first. So you can vote on other people's questions. So the most popular question so far is from Catherine Noy-Clark. Is there the potential for the pandemic to reduce the influence of agents in favour of more digital recruitment practices and direct online engagement from unis in the Indian market? Sandeep, let's hear from you. We haven't heard from you for a while. What do you think? Do you think there's going to be a shift in the way students navigate the process?
Recruiters like me in March to until even now, we were caught in a very tough situation where we couldn't get out of our houses. I mean, India was under lockdown. You couldn't even, in the UK, you could go out for exercise. In India, you did not even have that that commentary from the government. So we had to rely on, and a lot of our agents, and God bless them, but a lot of them were not really able to, shift and immediately start working from home and develop softwares and all of that. And EdTech came to our rescue. Interestingly, just another point which Lakshmi made earlier about the US, we had seen a lot of issues cropping up in the US, macroeconomic and other sort of issues which were coming up, and a lot of agents who were education technology agents were US centric. So was Leverage, right? A couple of years back when I met Akshay and sort of invited him for to come and be a part of our Shark Tank event and all of that. But most of these players are US centric because that's the largest cohort, which is, so businesses are, of course, they function towards the kind of supply side as Karan mentioned. And suddenly, with all this negative press coming in from the US, UK went in at the point of time, I remember April 22nd, the education ministers in the UK, they came out with a letter very clearly touching base on all the points, Karan mentioned, so employability, NHS health surcharge, the graduate immigration route. So those very clear sort of welcoming message which came out from the education ministers, I think really sort of put the things, set the things in the right way. And I think, yeah, so
and just to go back to the question, do you think students might be more likely to use one of the sort of edtech platforms such as Leverage Edu? There's quite a few others. We can mention some. I think this is one of my questions I want to get in there. There's Crimson, there's Adventus. There's been a lot of investment into trying to do recruitment differently in India. Do you think university students or university-bound students might be more likely to start seeking out?
I think the future is blended, Amy. So traditional players will not go out of business, and edtech players will also not go out of business. What edtech players have shown in the last 3-4 months is that they're extremely resilient. They can do exhibitions and fairs without charging too much money. They can, mentor your students. They can build those sort of pipelines for you so that you wouldn't suffer. So if I look at SX as business, where I do need to interact with a certain number of students to make sure they come and study with us, and it was to really give that helping hand during pandemic. But I think people in India love to sit and have chat. I was talking about this with Digbajay, that he would have to design other systems when it comes to the visa sort of consultation stage, because students would want to sit across a counselor, discuss about their finances and take advice. So blended's the way forward. And in the past, of course, edtech platforms have lended an extremely helping hand.
Great, thanks. Digvijay, over to you. I mean, would you say that you offer a blended solution as a sort of edtech platform?
Our hypothesis is slightly different, and let me use the analogy of Uber. Right, Uber came in a decade ago and essentially disrupted the way regular travel agencies work, and got a lot of entrepreneur drivers, an era of entrepreneur drivers to sort of come in, right? Which is where we realized that a lot of brick and mortar players who essentially have counselors on their payrolls, but do not have that entrepreneurial drive in them, or to be able to give dispassionate advice to students using a technology. It's more dependent on what is the expertise level of a counselor, right? If a counselor has like 5 years experience, is going to give good quality advice. If he's like 1 or 2 years experience, they need a little more experience under their belt to be able to give good quality advice. What I see is going to happen, and essentially what we are trying to do is create a student first brand of Leverage Edu, right? Which is already there. And essentially what we've seen in India work really well is students relate to a student first brand. Like why do students go to an IDP today? Because it's a brand that is out there that assures the student that you're going to get good quality advice and you're going to get to a great university, right? The problem with the current brick and mortar play is that it can't scale to tier 3, tier 4 cities unless these players go and establish their offices there, right? Which is where we say we build out an AI-led product suite end-to-end, like AI-led product suite, which helps students decide what is the university you should go to, what is the course you should go to, how do you go about applying, can you in a single click make your application go through, right? And can you get visa assistance while you're like looking at the platform doing something? Can an AI basically say that, hey, this is about time that for this university you have this much amount of money in your bank account already to make sure you get a successful visa, right? And once you have these product set of tools, you basically create this new era of entrepreneur coaches or counselors that we call our counselors as coaches, because we feel they're like coaches as in sports coaches there, right? It's a student coach here. And these student coaches essentially, for instance, our student coaches have been through this journey themselves. Our student coaches, for instance, in the UK, we have coaches who've studied themselves at a King's College London or a Durham or a Nottingham or a Westminster or University West London and the likes, right? And all these folks have gone through that process and understand what the pain that a student really goes through in terms of non-transparent advice. What we see how it's going to pan out eventually in the Indian market, Indian landscape, is these independent entrepreneur coaches are going to come on board. They're going to use a product suite, just the way an entrepreneur driver uses a product for Uber. They're going to use a product suite for giving dispassionate advice without much experience under their belt to students, and essentially get a lot of incentives that are not given out to the counselors today in the process, right? So it's going to be a lot more entrepreneurial and lot more technology and product driven. And I just want to make one more point, right? What happens is we've seen a lot of other players sort of evolve. And what they're essentially doing is the other school of thought is to say, can I go and look at a lot of these micro agents? 95% of the market is fragmented today, a lot of micro agents in tier 3, tier 4 cities. And can I go and create a product suite for these agents to help their students, right? For instance, what an Apply Board or probably an Adventist is also trying to do. And what we realize there is the big problem that university is going to face when they are at scale and they're placing, let's say, 10,000 students, is that the student does not really know that he's applying through an Apply Board, or does not really know that he's applying through an Adventist. They really know that the micro entrepreneur, the micro agent that is there. And that micro agent does not control quality well enough. So what's going to happen is 1,000 applications landing at a university, and you'll have a lot of visa rejections going through, right? A lot of non-quality students going through, which is where a branded technology play that is scalable becomes much more viable, because that is where you essentially say a micro entrepreneur gets good quality students coming there because of the brand pull. And they have the product suite of the technology, AI-led product suite to be able to give them dispassionate advice and send them to the right school, right? That's the ultimate vision. And that's where we feel the winning model is going to play out eventually.
So it sounds like you do think there's going to be quite a lot of activity, let's say, in the recruitment landscape.
Yeah.
What do you think, Lakshmi? Quick one from you, and then we'll move on to another question.
I think, in the short to medium term, both will coexist. And the brick and mortar well-established ones, those that have got the wherewithal to pivot to having tech-enabled solutions to keep their business going, will also survive. Obviously, Vijay mentioned about IDP, they have their war chest and all of that, but they didn't kind of, really at the start, their fares were a bit of hit and miss, but, they sort of kind of got over that and have had some really good fares. And even after, we recover from the pandemic, institutions will question, because the education fairs have become a business unit in themselves, right? For many of the brick and mortar agents, and institutions pay a fortune to attend their fairs, primarily because if they don't support them, then they can't go in and meet the counselors and train them, and etc. etc. The last mile connectivity gets affected. But having said that, the pandemic has made everybody pause and relook at where they spend their money, how they spend that money. And even for brick and mortar agents, this is a wake-up call, because many of them had to send staff members home without equipping them to even kind of counsel students via Skype, because many of them work with desktops. Most of them didn't have laptops. So all of these things are little pieces, but they tell us that change is very much in the horizon for brick and mortar agents. So short to medium term, they will all kind of come up with blended models.
Okay. And Karen, I mean, you're very close to what's being invested in across education. Do you also see this continue to be a sort of innovative, experimental phase for recruitment in India?
I think a lot depends on whether the digital platforms are able to turn digital into an advantage. So in the end, it's really nice when you buy a house to meet the guy or gal that's selling it to you. And ideally, you get to go to the house and walk around the house. Now, when a student goes abroad to study from India or from most emerging markets, this investment in rupees or dollars is typically the largest investment that family will make, sometimes more than they spent on their house. Now, with an agent, when you meet the agent, they're already doing it without visiting the school, right? And now you're saying, well, I'll use a digital agent. So now you're not meeting the agent and you've never been to the school. Sometimes you've never been to the country that you're going to. I mean, the equivalent, Amy, is imagine if you asked me, well, should I go study in Kampala? And you've never been to Africa, and it gets better. The agent has never been to Africa either, okay? So like it just keeps getting better. And going to this place is the cost of your house. So now you've got to make this decision. So the winner will be whoever it is that can provide the student with the most trustable answer. And the advantage that the in-person agent has is exactly that, which is, look, if things go wrong, you can come back and kick my ass. And here I am, here's my desk. The advantage that a digital agent has should be the ability maybe to be more proficient with data and understanding what suits the student more. Although, I mean, I've seen the different configurators that companies have, and I'm not super convinced about them right now. And the other advantage that the digital agents have that I haven't seen them take advantage of is very tight digital integration with the university. So imagine if I'm now evaluating Manchester versus Sydney, and Leverage can immediately give me like a virtual walkthrough of the university. And if I'm a keen debater, they can, bam, on WhatsApp, connect me to the head of the debate club at both universities. Like if they can, that's cool. Then I go, okay, I get it. Leverage is really providing me a real flavor of why Sydney is different from Manchester. And like to you, Amy, it's really obvious why Manchester and Sydney are different. Like Manchester has shitty weather compared to Sydney, but it has better curry than Sydney, right? But for an Indian student, I mean, this is completely abstract. It's like your Kampala versus Nairobi. It's just abstract. So how do you give the student some kind of practical flavor to what it is they're buying? And let's go back to the outcomes that they're buying. And this is the opportunity for an in-person or a digital agent. But I will say that if the digital agent doesn't do this and the in-person agent does it, then the in-person agent wins. Why? Because they get to provide all the digital stuff and they get to tell the student, guess what? If it doesn't work out, you can come back here and kick my ass.
Yeah, interesting. Digvijay, over to you, because I know you mentioned before to me that you have you have offices as well. So you are a digital agency, but so how do you manage that?
So exactly, I think coming to your point, Karan, I completely understand and completely agree that this is among the biggest decisions of someone's life, right? It's even bigger than buying a house, which is where we realize we need to have physical presence. But again, think about it, right? In terms of how does Uber do it, or how does any marketplace does it, right? Even in the real estate industry, what happens is there are a lot of experience centers that are built out, and these entrepreneurs essentially come and do interior designing in these experience centers and sell to these people. Similarly, can you go to tier 3, tier 4 towns, build out a small experience center, and for these entrepreneur coaches to really come in, use your product suite, be able to give dispassionate advice to the student, do all the things that you were saying. For instance, give a tour, give like informed advice to the students, and actually meet them physically in person, because you need to meet someone physically in person, or maybe over a video call in the current circumstances. But having said that, what I truly believe is what's going to happen in tier 3, tier 4 cities in India or other emerging markets is they're going to be these micro entrepreneurs who are going to come up, who are going to use the product suite, who are going to use these experience centers to have meetings with students in case they want to have that with their parents, and give them dispassionate advice to the right university or the course, as I may say.
Quick question as well. Do you offer loan financing at Leverage Edu? Is that something that also marks you out?
Absolutely. So our entire journey, for instance, is completely digitized. So a student comes in, gets a dashboard of their own. In that dashboard, they're able to search through multiple universities. They're able to create their own profile, and with a single click of a button, they're able to apply to multiple universities. And now imagine a student at like 2 a.m. trying to think about his SOP. Is basically saying suddenly, like he's shortlisted 5 universities, and there's a pop-up that says, you know what, there's a cost of living calculator. Why don't you just explore how much it's going to cost you on a monthly basis? And there immediately there are advertisements of, they're basically plugins of different API plugins of our 8 to 10 partners that we have, including the likes of a Prodigy or multiple NBFCs that we are working with, an Avance or a Credila and Empower Financing and the likes. And they're sort of, it's simple. Since we already have the profile, that automatically the indicative rates of interest also start showing up. And basis that, the students also automatically is interested. It's nudged towards saying, okay, can I just push in my application and see if I'm going to get a loan? And similar things with accommodation as well, right? While he's applying to a Manchester, like Karan said, right? And he's saying that, okay, the accommodations at University of Manchester sort of start showing up. And the student's like, okay, let me also browse through these. So his interest in applying to that university also keeps getting more and more solidified, while the student is also sort of exploring other options around the value-added services around admissions.
Very interesting. I think it's a really interesting space, and I think I've seen so much innovation in the last 12 to 18 months. Right, we are running out of time, but I'm definitely going to squeeze another question in. Next most popular question is from Anne Muston. How do we educate to explain that online courses can actually take longer to prepare and therefore cost more than the established route, cost the establishment more? Also, by online courses, is it easy to reflect as there is a record easily available? Do they recognize this? So thoughts from all of you, I think, on how do you educate? I mean, we've already said that Indian students don't seem that keen to study online. How do you educate students, certainly around the cost, that it costs a lot to set it up and do it well? Sadi, over to you first.
Well, one of the things, Amy, we have to realize is, and we ranked pretty high on the remote readiness survey. We've got a lot of students who might start online. There are a good proportion of students already studying. Online education or blended learning start, if you think of it almost as a knob which you can turn up and down depending. So they were developed firstly because there was no other way. So in a situation where you can't teach face-to-face, you've got to come up with, and then you sort of decrease it down a lot of the lab work, a lot of the face-to-face lectures are sort of decreased down to a certain number of students in a class. But at the same time, if tomorrow you see a second wave of infection, and this could be any other country, this could be anywhere, right? You could again go back into a system where people can use softwares like Moodle to go back and listen to their lectures again, and sort of talk to their friends and have a chat outside of class virtually and do assignments. But ideally, only online learning and learning completely remotely in India is never going to be accepted the way face-to-face lectures are. And I think that's something which we are cognizant of as an institution, and we realize that well, the UK government has very clearly said that if you come and study with us anywhere, until April, after April, before April, if you come, you get the graduate immigration route, even if you come and study the part of your course online. That goes on to say that, even the UK government, even institutions are very clear that this is going to be a part-time blended solution. And in the longer run, only a part of the course out is going to be online.
Okay. And Lakshmi, what do you think? Obviously, with lots of universities, I mean, have they had issues trying to persuade students of the value of online, and what's the best response?
So I think in India, the perception about online education, and some a qualification, for example, that has been acquired entirely through an online mode, if that leads to really good job outcomes, parents and students would not mind paying for it. And that is the space, if you look at organizations like Upgrad are starting to move into, where they are connecting companies to their course curriculum and are actually kind of driving the outcomes in favor of the students' livelihood and their job outcomes. So they are not only kind of, there used to be a time when a lot of us who were already in the workforce would look at online because we didn't have enough time to do other things. But now that audience has changed to include first-time learners for a particular program who are so focused on their career outcomes. And the minute you can prove that, okay, you do this and it's completely online, there are mentors, coaches, all of them around you, helping you kind of navigate this, and it will take you into this kind of a job with this kind of a salary, nobody is going to blink an eyelid for paying as much as face-to-face instruction. And that we are going to see. Probably we would have seen it pre-COVID in a few years' time. I think we are going to see that in a much shortened time frame post-COVID.
Okay. Thank you. Karen, your thoughts on this?
I agree with Lakshmi entirely. I think it's fascinating that that one would want to educate students on how much it costs to do an online course. It's like, it's kind of not the customer's problem, right? They're kind of like, look, I don't want this. This is not giving me what I want. It sucks. Don't tell me it costs you a lot of money to do it. Just stop doing it then. It's like, I once had a girlfriend that would tell me, talk to the hand. That's kind of the response I would give a university that said, this is how, my online course is really expensive. I'm like, just talk to the hand, man. I don't want to hear this. And so I do think it is about outcomes. First of all, I love your mention of Upgrad, Lakshmi. Upgrad was started by Mayank Kumar, who used to work for me at Parthenon. So there you go, one of my guys. But I agree with you that solutions like Upgrad, if they were done through a foreign university, would get us to the goal, right? So if you told a student that, okay, you're doing the course online, instead of this being a disadvantage, let's make it an advantage. How? We're going to pair the course with an internship. And it's going to be a remote working internship because everybody in the world is working remotely now. Then suddenly the student goes, well, that's awesome. Because really, they're not really concerned about what they're learning in macro and microeconomics. They're not. If you told them, here's the job, just buy the job from us. Forget the degree. Here's the job. Buy the job. They'll buy the job.
Yeah.
So my point, this is what they want. No one actually thinks that, they're going to get the Oxbridge experience or an Ivy experience at 99% of the universities that Indian students end up at. They're looking at the outcome. So if a university can digitally provide the outcome by linking up with employers to do micro internships, remote placements, this would be magic, because then you've taken the disadvantage of online delivery and turned it into an advantage. Because, stuck in, wherever in Surrey or any place, you couldn't do that. But now I can get you an internship with a bank in the city of London while you're sitting in Bhubaneswar in India. I mean, hey, that's hot stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, we are seeing quite a few companies coming up now talking to us saying this is what we're doing. So I think there is definitely innovation in that space. Great. I'm aware of the time. So Digvijay, I'm going to come over to you for final thoughts on what you see happening sort of in the Indian market in the next 12 to 18 months. Oh, and I'll unmute you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think next 12 to 15 months are going to be really, really exciting. I think we've seen a very bad time pass by. And I think the Indian ecosystem is now really warming up with all the great announcements that are happening across the UK, across even Canada and Australia. Still a bit of a sort of mess there. But yeah, they are looking up. And I think next 12 to 15 months, we're going to see a lot of backlog of students who were there who could not really apply this year or decided to defer. Plus the new students who will be graduating next year would be all sort of queuing up, gathering all together to go into September 21 and forward, right? So that's definitely a very, very sort of big market that we're going to see. I think overall, what I find, another thing that's going to happen, that China is essentially slowing down for a number of reasons, and especially with the COVID coming in now. China's immigration for education purposes is also slowing down, which again is going to give an advantage to India per se. And universities are going to be looking at more of India to get more international students coming in. So that is another plus point for the Indian ecosystem, the Indian students to really find good sort of opportunities to study abroad. So yeah, next 12 to 15 months, very, very positive, very, very excited as well.
Great, thank you so much. If I could just thank Digvijay, Lakshmi, Sandeep and Karen for joining us. Thanks everyone for staying with us, and we'll see you at the next Pi webinar.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.